Hello, welcome to Web of Stories. My name is Melinda, and I am here with my rankings for the final round of this year's Booktube Prize. I was doing nonfiction, which I really enjoyed, and I will be doing nonfiction next year. I enjoyed it so much. And I am filming this on Friday, September 13th, so I don't know who won. However, I'm scheduling this to go out at 10 a.m. my time on October 1st. So by the time this drops, I will have known who won, and you can go see the video. If I have time and I remember, I will go in and edit this with the link to the video, as you know, before it publishes or right after, so you can just go there and see who actually won. But yeah, so let's get into the rankings. So I had 6 books to read, to have read, I should say. I ended up for this round only having to read 2 because I had read 3 of the 6 in previous rounds, and I had read 1 just on my own. So there were only 2 books that I had to read for this round. So made it very manageable. And let's get into it. Now I'm going to start with my lowest ranked one to my number 1 pick. And I'm going to be honest here. This my lowest ranked one is the only one I will say I didn't like. This was one I actually will say I did not like this book. And this book is We Were Once a Family, a story of love, death, and child removal in America by Roxana Asgharian. Just a minute. While I'm filming this, my light is blinking. Sorry. So this book talks about what's called the Hart family tragedy, which was a family, 2 women who had adopted a number of children out of foster care. It was not a good situation, and it basically ended up with the women putting everyone in a van and driving off, doing a Thelma and Louise off a cliff into the ocean in California. Okay. And I've watched people's videos about this and their reaction, and I need to kind of set my personal stage on this for a little bit, because where I am kind of changes the way I look at this book a little bit. The Hart family tragedy is local news for me. So the Hart family lived in the Portland area in West Lynn, which is just, I don't know, 10 miles south of me. And then they moved to the Vancouver area. And I'm going to turn this off, sorry, because it's driving me crazy. There we go. Lights changed. In the Vancouver area, which is still in the Portland metro area before this all happened. So a lot of people, when they talk about this book, they're rightfully shocked at what happened, you know, the abuse that happened, everything that happened with this family, you know, with their adoptive parents and all that, rightfully shocked. And that is part of their experience of reading this book, and as it should be. Now, I was also rightfully shocked with all that. It's just that my rightful shockedness happened a few years ago before I read this book, because it was in the news here. So, I did not have the same sort of gut reaction that a lot of people did to this book, just because I already knew the worst parts of it, because I live in Oregon. So I came to it, it's just that's where I'm coming from. Just put it there. So I had 2 really big issues with this book, and I'm going to start with the slightly lesser of the 2 issues, if that makes any sense. So a lot of the discussion in this book is with the child welfare system in various states. And these children were adopted out of the foster care system in Texas. And Asgharian does a really good job of chronicling the problems with that system. There are a lot of these children are African-American children, and the way she describes it, there is a fair amount of racism in these cases. I can only go by what's in this book, so I'm not going to say that this is, I mean, it's Texas, so you know what. But I'm just going to say, in this case, there was a lot of racism, and she's very critical of that, as she should be. However, I felt like she really should have drawn a line after that, because we're actually dealing with the child welfare system in 4 states: Texas, and then Minnesota, which is where this couple lived when they adopted the children. And then they moved to Oregon, and then to Washington. There's also a little bit with the police, which is kind of along the same lines as the police in California, but we're just going to put that to the side here. We're just going to talk about the child welfare system in these 4 states. So she goes in great detail, as she should, about the Texas system and everything that went wrong in these cases. Great. But she doesn't differentiate between Texas and the other states, because what happened in the other states was something very different. In the other states, like, she tells it, the actions of what happened, but you can tell her sentiment is not what the actions are. Child welfare services, child protective services, whatever it's called in those states, were called out to this family several times in these different states. In Minnesota and Oregon and then Washington, it's not the welfare workers. I mean, the social workers, I guess, is probably the best way to, the social workers that are the fault here, which is where in Texas, she really highlighted the issues with the workers and the system. Okay. But in these other states, what you have are social workers who do everything they can within the scope of their own job, like as much as their job will let them do to help these children, right? Now, a discussion can be had that their job was not expansive enough. I mean, it was not defined in ways that should have been defined in a bigger way, if that makes sense. There, you can have discussions that the system could have done more. But I really felt like she was saying the social workers could have done more. And I found that really frustrating, because when she was telling, I mean, if you look at what actually happened, these were people, men and women, who were doing everything they could with this family and were constrained by the law or what their jobs were, all that. And it just was very infuriating to me that she is putting the shortcomings of a system on people who were doing the best that they could. And there also was this, well, these people didn't do everything they could. You're also dealing with the parents who knew how to work the system. Now, yeah, could the system be fixed to prevent that? Yeah. And it should have been. Yeah. But the social workers were not the ones who could do that. Does that make sense? So the social workers were doing everything they could. And they're being painted kind of with a brush in this book that they're falling down on their job when they really weren't. I found that really aggravating about this. So that's my first thing. Second one is actually a lot bigger, and it really goes to my big issue with this book. At the beginning of the book, as Garian kind of says that her argument is that this whole system of foster care and foster to adopt system, everything, it's geared for the benefit of the adoptive parents, where it needs to be geared for the benefit of the children. I am 100% for that. 100%. I agree 100%. Yay. Those are the words that she puts in this book. Like, those are the words that she wrote out and that the narrator, I did audio, the narrator read. But that's not the argument she makes. The argument she makes is actually that the system should work in the benefit of the birth families, which is not the same thing. So the children that were adopted into the Hart family came from two different families in Texas. And in both of these families, they were removed from mothers or parents. It doesn't matter. It just happened to be mothers. It could have been fathers too. Mothers who very clearly were not able to care for their children. That's something that should have happened for the safety of these children. They should have been removed because their custodial parents were not taking care of them. Now, in one case, should they have been placed with other family members? That's an argument you can have. I probably would say yes, they should have. That's an argument you can have. But she goes back to the fact that they were taken from the mothers. And I'm like, but the mothers were not parenting or providing safe atmosphere for her children. Like the children were not safe in these situations. And the whole point of child welfare is to make sure that children are safe. And yes, it fell down in this particular case. Yes, no one's denying that. But there are a lot of pieces that happen in this. Yes, those children should have been, at least temporarily, until the custodial parents could have gotten the care that they needed, the help that they needed. The children needed to be somewhere else. Maybe with other family members. Fine, we can make that whatever. And it just really bothered me because she kept coming back to this. And then you get to the final part of the book. I don't know if it actually was an epilogue or it was just the last chapter. And she makes two comments that just really kind of clarified it for me. The first one was, she said something like, yes, if you leave the children with their birth parents, there's some safety issues there. But think about the emotional damage of removing them. And I'm sitting here thinking, you have two evils here, and I have to choose one of them, right? One is children going through emotional distress because their parent is not able to function as a safe custodial parent, okay? And the other is the parent is not able to operate as a safe custodial parent. Danger comes to the children and they die. Which of these two evils am I going to choose? I'm going to choose this one here, because yes, I understand that taking children from their birth families can be very emotionally traumatizing for children. But if it's between that and death, I'm going to take the children. I shouldn't say I think the children should be put in a safe situation. And I just really, and her argument was, no, they should stay in the unsafe situation. I was, for the benefit, what? I was like, what? I don't, that doesn't even seem like English language to me. Like the words you were saying, that just don't even make sense to me. And he goes on, and then it comes out. She herself had gone through the foster care system. And I wouldn't say that alone disqualifies her from being able to write a book like this. But it was very clear that she wasn't far enough away. And even when she talks about her interactions with this family, where she got closer than one should in a journalistic sort of way, there were some boundaries that were crossed between her and these families as she's doing the research for this book. She did not have the distance from this horrible tragedy and the various parties involved. She did not have the distance to be able to write this book in an objective way. And I was like, there you go. There's a problem with this book. So yes, there's a lot of issues here. There are a lot of really difficult issues with here. And I just don't think that she was able to really objectively look at all those issues. And yes, that was my problem with this book. There you go. So that was book number 6. Now from 5 up, I recommend all these books. These were all great books. Great. Number 5. Again, loved this book. The Underworld: Journeys to the Depths of the Ocean by Susan Casey. So I read this in the first round of the Booktube Prize. And this is about like deep sea submersible science, not Titanic stuff, because, you know, I have my phobias around that. But going down into like the trenches in the ocean, the deep, and, you know, the value of doing research there and the value that those ecosystems provide for the planet and all that. I found this fascinating. It was very readable. You get to meet the different people who are involved in this research, and there's a lot of really colorful characters. My only issue with this book, is that there is a section in the middle where she goes off and talks about treasure hunting shipwrecks, which is interesting. I'm not saying it's not interesting. It just doesn't have anything to do with the rest of the book. I was like, why is that there? Now, the same round that I read this, there was another book that had kind of the same issue. I didn't find this one as egregious because this is not as long a book as the other one, or it could have just been cut out. It goes in a little bit better, but it's still a thing there. So I do have to take that into consideration, but otherwise I do recommend this book. I don't have a science background. I was a liberal arts kid. I have a history major. English and history. That's my thing. I took as much science as I needed to graduate. But I had no problem following this book. I found it fascinating. I recommend this book. Great book. But it is in 5th place because when you get to this point, you're dealing with the best of the best, mostly. So there you go. That's my number 5. So in the semifinals, I ran into this problem of having 4 5-star books to deal with. And you vote for 3 to go through. And now you're just ranking them. I'm in the exact same position again. The next 4 books were all 5-star books for me. I think the Underworld was a 4-star book, or an A. These are all 5-star books. So my ranking from here on out is not quality. I'm going to use the same ranking I used for the semifinal round, which was like, what is this impact on? How does this impact my worldview? How great is the impact on my worldview? That's my qualification. So please do not think that I am saying one of these books is better than the other, because they're all 5-star books for me, okay? Number 4 is How to Say Babylon by Safia Sinclair or Sophia Sinclair. I have heard it both ways. So this is her memoir of growing up in the Rastafarian society culture in Jamaica and the trauma basically that she endured doing this. She has since left it. She is a poet. Because she's a poet, this is a beautifully written book. Beautifully written. It's a very, very moving memoir. It has really stuck with me. It's memoir. It didn't, I can't say that it changed my worldview in any way. It's fascinating. And I recommend you read this. Like, go, if you haven't read it, go read it. But as far as changing my worldview, it didn't have that much of an impact. I don't see the world that differently after reading this book, which is why I'm putting it in 4th out of my 4 5-star books on this list. Again, not quality, just impact. And so I will say I really struggled when it comes to 3rd and 2nd place. I went back and forth and back and forth and back and forth on this. I ultimately decided, and it could have got so close, could have gone the other way, that number 3, I'm going to go with, if you saw, this is the book I finished this month. So this is my first time talking about this book on this channel. My 3rd place book is Master, Slave, Husband, Wife, An Epic Journey from Slavery to Freedom by Il-Yan Wu. And this follows the story of Ellen and William Craft. These were 2 enslaved people. They weren't actually married because they couldn't get married, but they were married in spirit, who escaped in 1850, I believe, from Georgia to the north, and they ended up in England, and they came back. But the way they did it was very interesting and very daring. So Ellen Craft appeared white. She was, I think if you do it, it's like her, I think she's like if you had to like do the little pie chart, she's like an 8th African American. So she's very light skinned. And William Craft was mulatto, which is the term they use in the book, which is half black. It's biracial, like you're kind of even there. So he's lighter skinned too. But the way they did it was Ellen Craft dressed up as a young man, a rich young man, and she took William, her husband, along as her slave. Then that's how they were able to travel north. And it was very daring because they're illiterate. And so they had to do all these ruses so that they wouldn't have to, write anything or read anything and all this. And it is an adventure story. It is an adventure story from the time they leave. It's like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? Sort of thing. And then they go to Philadelphia and then they go to Boston, and there's reasons for that. And then while they're in Boston, the Fugitive Slave Act is passed. And if you don't know what that is a law that was passed pre-Civil War where it gave the right basically of enslavers to go to free states, to recapture the people they had enslaved. And it put the backing of the US government and the US, law enforcement behind that. So it was a really devastating situation for people who had escaped enslavement, who were self-liberated is the term that they use in this book, which I actually kind of like. And Ellen and William Craft had at this point become very public. So their former enslavers knew where they were. And there was a real kind of like cat and mouse thing going on there. And then it goes on about, their life. Fascinating book. So fascinating. And what really stuck out to me, I'm a history person. A lot of this wasn't new history. I know, whatever. But what really, I just kept going back to this. Like, if I were a person in 1850 from the North, a non-enslaver person, and I went to Georgia and I saw an enslaved person who, to my eyes, was white, how would I be able to reconcile it? And so her enslaver was, there was like some, who actually was enslaved, that's a little bit of a thing in there, but her enslaver was her half-sister. And they knew it was a half-sister. She didn't recognize her as the half-sister didn't recognize Ellen as her half-sister, but they knew it. What do you have to have in your mind to enslave your half-sister who looks as white as you do? Like, that whole thing just just my mind is just going back to like, what kind of mental gymnastics did these people have to do to be okay with this? That's like the thing that really sticks out to me. But I also really impressed with what this couple was able to do. And, you know, they are a really remarkable story. They aren't known probably as well as they should be, only because of like when things were published with other people and, you know, just like timing. Like they had bad market placement for their story, which is why we don't know them as well as we know some other people who had their narratives out there. Really fascinating book. I did this on audio. It has 2 narrators, which is interesting the way they divide up the 2 narrators. There's a woman and a man who narrate it, but it's a very good audiobook, by the way. So I don't know if there's pictures that I'm missing, but I will tell you, I went to Ileana Wu's website and on there, and I'm going to link it down here below, but she links to a video, a little like 12-minute video about the crafts. Very well done. It's really short. It features their great-great-great-grandchildren. So definitely, I'll put the link to that down below. Go check that out. Very good book. Number 2 was my number 1 in the first round. And that is my big surprise of this whole experience of doing the Booktube Prize. And that is King a Life by Jonathan Eig. I will link my full review video. This is the only one I did a full review video of, but I'll link that down below too. But long story short, I didn't want to read this book. Like I dreaded reading this book. I put it off to last in my round, and then I read it and I was like, oh my God, this is fantastic. This is a fantastic biography. In that video that I linked down below, I go into more detail about this, but I came to reading this biography of Martin Luther King Jr., having heard and been told very conflicting things about him in my past. So this book really clarified some of those, like what was true and what wasn't true, Mom and Dad. But it also really forced me to look at people in the public eye in a different way, because Martin Luther King did some great things and he also did some horrible things. And you can't forget one for the other. And even if you look at people that you really admire nowadays, this is a reminder that they're human and they aren't perfect. And, you know, everyone is fallible. Everyone has, and you can't just say, well, they've done all these good things, so therefore we're just going to forget about this. No, because sometimes that forgetting about the bad stuff is harmful. You need to remember sometimes it is, depending on what it is. But in Martin Luther King's case, it is important to be aware of his views on women and how he treated them, because it was not good. And my experience of reading this book it's a reminder when I watch people today who I really admire. And remember, like, this is, you know, be careful with that pedestal. And I think this is so this book came out now because you think like, what's new with Martin Luther King? He's been dead for so long. What's new is the Freedom of Information Act released a bunch of documents about him recently. And then that was used in the writing of this book. So we know more about him now. I really think this is a book Americans should read. I did read this book. I did not do the audio, but the audio is, narrated. I can't remember who the narrator is, but he's the same guy who did The Wager, who is one of the best narrators I have ever heard. So I'm sure it's great. Really well done. And also just the practice of writing something like this, it is incredibly well done. Eig leaves his opinion out of it, except for like one sentence in the epilogue. He's very fair about this, and he's very clear on what is fact, what is what we think happened, all these different things. Should we trust this source? Really well done. Fantastic. So that's my number 2. And my number 1, also a surprise, because I never thought starting this that my number 1 book would be a science book, but it was. And it is Eve, How the Female Body Drove 200 Million Years of Human Evolution. So this is a book about evolution and all this sort of like how evolution works and, you know, the adaptations in the female body and why this happened and blah, blah, you know. Just from the title, you can kind of figure out what it's about. It is written so well, like not a science person. I was sucked in. I had no trouble following the science in this book because she explains it so well. But why this book was so impactful to me was it put the role of women in the forefront. I'm not saying that, women are, more important than men. I am saying that for a very long time, it's been all about the men. And this is like, wait a minute. Look at all these really important things that throughout world culture, we're talking history, society, culture, all of that together, that women were the drivers on. And for so long, as someone who is a history person and has dealt with millennia of women being pushed to the back, seeing this up front, I was like, oh, that is fantastic. That is so amazing. And this is so interesting. This has totally changed. This one changed my worldview. This is like, take off these glasses and put on these glasses. Totally different. Kat Bohannon is a really interesting writer. She has a lot of humor that she brings to this. She does at times tie things to modern things. For example, she talks about voices, women's voices. And she actually talks about like when Hillary Clinton accepted the presidential nomination and what happened, which was a really interesting tie. I was kind of like, what's she talking about? Then I was like, oh, that's really interesting. So yeah, fantastic book. I did it on audio. It was no problem. That's my number one. And color me surprised. Color me shocked. I did not realize when it all came down to it, that would be my number one book, but there you go. So if you have followed the Booktube Prize, I'm assuming that at this point you know who actually won, but I'm interested that if you have been following, especially the nonfiction, because that's what I've been reading, who do you think should have won? What would have been your number one choice? So let me know down below. Like, subscribe, join my Discord, and I am really looking forward to next year's Booktube Prize. If you are interested in participating, you can. More information will start coming out. I think you can start signing up for that towards the end of this year. Robert Sheard, who runs the Booktube Prize, he does a fantastic job. We'll start putting information out about that. I will post some of that, share some of that information. So just keep an eye out if you're interested in participating next year. So I highly recommend it. I really had a great time doing it. Thank you very much. I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.